Welcome to the part 13 of our tutorial, and previously in part 12 I just showed you how to 3D model the hair for our character, and here is now the final result. And as well as this, I added this extra cloth in here. Okay, and we're going to focus in this video on rendering process. So let's open the part 13 rendering that max. So the rendering process, basically we're going to create camera, lights, and add global illumination into our scene, so that we can be able to render our character just like this one, but not this background. So we're going to focus only on the character. Okay, so to start, let's open a part 13 rendering.max, and uh, make sure that the default folder is highlighted in blue, so that every object that we are going to create inside in here will instantly put inside the default folder. Okay, so first thing we need to do is to use Vray rendering engine. Okay, so press F10 on your keyboard or click this render setup, and under command tab, let's go to assign renderer group. And our rendering engine is currently set into a default, which is the scanline rendering. And while we use V-Ray material shader for our objects, we should match the rendering engine into this material shader. Okay, so since this objects uses V-Ray material shader, we should use a V-Ray material rendering engine. Okay, and press OK. Otherwise, if we leave this rendering engine into a default scanline, this object would render black. So both material shader and rendering engines should be match, and it should be both in V-Ray. Okay, and now let's close and deselect. Okay, so first thing we need to do is to create a camera view. So let's zoom out in here and use this camera. So if you cannot see this V-Ray toolbar, just right click in here and click V-Ray toolbar. Okay, click this one and just click and drag. Okay, and if you are done creating a camera, right click. Okay, and now press letter C on your keyboard and press Shift F on your keyboard to bring up the safe frame, and navigate and focus on her. Alright, so I think that should be enough. And now I want to see both perspective view and camera view. So let's click this maximize viewport toggle, and it will bring back the top, left view, and front view. Okay, so let's drag in here. Okay, so I'm gonna change the front view to perspective view. Right click in here and press letter P on your keyboard and press F3. So we should be focusing and working in perspective view and avoid any unnecessary navigation here in Vray camera, so that we won't distract our camera view here. Okay, so next let's do some test render. Click this icon, render free frame buffer, and now this render frame buffer renders the perspective scene instead of the camera view. Okay, so let's bring back the render setup, and in render setup here in view, let's click the drop down arrow list and choose V-Ray camera and lock, so that every time we render our scene, it will only render the camera view. Okay, so you may click the render button in here or in here, so this both of these has the same function. Okay, so I'm gonna click this render. Alright, now the next thing we need to do is to give a proper camera exposure into our camera. Okay, so close this one. Press number 8 on your keyboard or locate this environment dialog under rendering environment. Okay, and in exposure control, let's select V-Ray exposure. And under V-Ray exposure control, let's change the mode to from V-Ray camera. And in camera node, click the none button and choose the camera. And the camera will start to show up in the camera node button. Okay, and close. With this camera still selected, open the modify tab. And let's just leave everything as is except for this shutter speed and film speed. So in shutter speed, let's give it a value of 45 and the film speed around 600. And now let's test render. Alright, okay, so deselect everything. Okay, the next thing we need to create is the light. Okay, choose the light, very plain light, and drag just beside her. Okay, and with this light selected, head back to modify tab and turn on its targeted. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in first. Targeted, and it will bring up the target object for this light. Select the target object and let's align this object into our character using the move tool. Okay, so select the light one again and place it just behind her. Okay, over here. All right, so basically we need to set up a 3-point light. Okay, so hold the shift key on your keyboard while moving and it's gonna duplicate our object into a new light object, and press copy and OK, and let's just put the new light just beside her. Okay, right, and another one and copy, right. Okay, so now let's do another test render. Alright, so as we can see here in our latest rendering, the light has too much intensity, so we have to adjust its intensity one by one. Okay, so click this one first, and this one starts to show up on our rendering view. So to avoid that, uh, select this light, and under options click the invisible. Okay, so that it won't show up on our rendering anymore. All right, and now under intensity, let's change the multiplier into value of 3. Alright, and it's gonna lessen the intensity of this light. And change the color to blue. Okay, and it's gonna add some more artistic color just behind our character. Okay, and let's adjust the sizes around 650. Right. Okay, just beside her. And this one, let's give it a multiplier of 3, right, and as well as the sizes 650 by 650, and let's leave the color into white. Okay, and now let's test render. Okay, so that is much better than the previous one. And now let's lessen the intensity of this last one. Okay, so this should be around 0.5. Okay, and sorry, and the size should be 300 by 300. All right, and test render. Okay, so you may want to zoom in into your character to see a uh, much detailed image. Okay, so if you want to see larger sizes of this canvas, uh, just go on to render setup, and under output size you may choose between these button, or you may manually input a value in here. So I'm gonna input in here around 1500, but before that, don't forget to click the lock, so that every time we input a value in here, the other one will automatically or instantly follow. Okay, so I'm gonna put some 1500 pixels. Okay, and now I'm gonna test render once more. All right, and now let's try to zoom in and try to see much detailed image. And I think the pixels are doing good, because the frame buffer is now set into a higher resolution, around 1500 times 1125. All right, so uh, the next thing we need to do is to add global illumination. As we can see here that some areas that are covered with shadows are colored in total black. So the light is supposed are supposed to bounce off the surface and illuminates the that areas. Okay, so how do we do such global illumination? Okay, so just bring up the render setup or click this icon. Okay, so I already have in here, and under global illumination you just have to click and enable global illumination. And under irradiance map, I don't want to use the higher settings for this global illumination, so that we have to change it into low. And let's change the basic to expert, so that we can access this multipass and uncheck it. Otherwise, if we leave this multipass check, our rendering will this frame buffer will render multiple times, so we have to uncheck this multipass. Okay, so that's the basic of setting up global illumination. Okay, and close, and use this region render, and let's do a test render just at this area, so that we can compare the new one to the old one. Okay, render, and you can now see here that the global illumination is already letting the light bounce off the surface. Okay, and I'm gonna do the test render the whole thing once more. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to further enhance the rendering quality. Okay, so let's click in here, show color correction, and check the exposure. Okay, and give an exposure around 1.25. Okay, and in color balance, check the color balance, and I want to change the midtones and give it a some sort of a around cool or warm color. So check the midtone, and we can now start changing the color of for the midtone. So I'm gonna give it some more magenta here, and some blue color. Okay, as well as the highlight, I'm gonna give it cyan, magenta, sorry, green, and some yellow. Right, and now let's head back to curve. So let's check the curve. So basically the curve will just enhance the shadows, midtones, and highlights more. Okay, so let's select the first point at this one and try to manipulate it handle. Okay, so it basically this point basically changes the contrast of our rendering. So I have to put this up and select the other one, and this one basically changes the midtones and highlight. So I'm gonna enhance the midtones and highlight. by placing the handle over here. Okay, and if you are done, close this color correction. And now I want to add some visual effects into our rendering. Click this open lens effect, okay, and click the bloom effect, and it adds a bloom effect, of course. And I don't want such a high intensity of this bloom effect. Okay, so here in sizes or weight, you have to reduce the weights around here and the sizes as well as in here. Okay, and close. Okay, so that's it. And now let's try zooming in into our character. Okay, uh, as I have mentioned earlier in my previous video that I forgot to change the material shader for the skin. So the skin shader for the hair, the clothes, and other parts of our character are already using V-Ray material shader, except for the skin. Okay, so I have to change this one first. So bring up the material editor, okay, or press letter M on your keyboard. And here in material slot, click this, use this pick material from object and pick the material object from the skin. And now the skin, as we can see here now that this skin is using a standard material shader, and it already has a uh, what you call this texture in it. So we are going to change this standard material shader into a V-Ray subsurface scattering. Right click this one and copy. Okay, and now click the standard material and V-Ray, and let's change the standard to fast subsurface scattering. Press OK. And now we have to paste the texture that we just copied earlier here in subsurface color. Right click and paste. And if you want to see the texture on our Viewport, click this fall off and click this skin diffuse and show shaded material and Viewport. Okay, and click this go to parent to go at the top of this parameter. All right, now let's do a test render in here. So I'm gonna do test render here and click render. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to illuminate that graininess, that grains on the surface of our objects. And to do that, that graininess pertains to the subdivision level of our material shader, as well as subdivision level for the white. So we have to give it a higher subdivision level to soften this up and to eliminate that such grain surface on our object. Okay, so first uh, we have to start off with the skin shader, and under skin shader just browse in here under single scatter subdivision. So if we leave the subdivision into a value of 8, these grains will keep on showing up into our rendering. So we have to set up into a value of 24, as well as this specular glossiness, specular subdivision 24. Okay, and now into the second material slot, let's test check if the material shader for the other objects has enough subdivision level. Okay, so here it is. I already set a higher value into it, as well as for the uh, code object. So we did it earlier into our previous video. Okay, so we don't need to change this anymore. Okay, now the second thing we need to adjust to illuminate these grains is to select each light one by one, and the light has a subdivision as well. So we have to set this into a value of 24. A value of 16 is enough, but for me, I just want to be at a value of 24. Okay, and 24. Okay, and let's do some test rendering over here. and click render, and that's illuminate the grains on our surface. Okay, so now I'm gonna do a test render for our character. Okay, so here is our final result. And in the next video, in part 14, we are going to focus on compositing. Compositing, basically, we need to create this uh, render process, and this render process, this is what we are going to use to enhance our rendering more inside Photoshop. And of course, we are going to try uh, do some digital painting and photo manipulation to add some background on our character. Okay, so that's it, and see you in the next video.